The Copper Still Bar was never meant for history, just laughter, whiskey, and small-town gossip. To Ravensbrook, Elara Voss was only a bartender, a quiet woman who poured drinks and kept to herself. But on one freezing night, the door opened, and four Navy SEALs stepped inside. Their leader froze at the sight of her, as if a ghost had returned. She was supposed to be dead. Outside, black SUVs crept through the snow, surrounding the building like predators. Inside, a single name broke the silence, one no local had ever heard. Not Elara Voss, but Commander Celeste Ward. And with it, the truth emerged. The woman behind the bar carried secrets powerful enough to burn nations, and tonight, they had come back to claim her. Ravensbrook, Montana, was the kind of town that didn't exist on most maps. Tucked between ridges of pine and endless fields blanketed in snow for half the year, it was a place where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. The Copper Still, a rustic wooden bar with weathered beams and a faded sign above the door, stood as the beating heart of the community. If a stranger ever wanted to understand Ravensbrook, all they had to do was step inside on a Friday night, when laughter, whiskey, and gossip mingled under the amber glow of hanging lanterns. And at the center of it all stood Elara Voss. For 7 years, she had been the bartender no one questioned. She poured drinks with practiced efficiency, offered polite smiles when small talk required it, and disappeared into the background whenever conversations grew too curious. To the townsfolk, Elara was a constant fixture, like the bar's oak counter or the brass taps that gleamed under lamplight. She was reliable, quiet, and, above all, ordinary. But ordinary was a mask, and masks are made to hide scars. From the sheriff's stool in the corner, Daniel Rourke saw what others missed. Rourke was a man carved out of the Montana landscape. Broad shoulders, lined face, eyes that scanned a room out of habit rather than choice. He was the only one who noticed the way Elara never placed herself with her back to the door. The way she positioned bottles and glasses, not merely for efficiency, but to give herself a clear view of every entrance. The way her hand paused, just for a fraction of a second, whenever a stranger walked in. 7 years ago, when she had first drifted into Ravensbrook, no luggage but a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, Rourke had asked her the kind of questions sheriffs are expected to ask. Where are you from? What brings you here? Her answers had been vague but steady, and though he never pressed further, he had filed away the subtle things. The faded scar along her collarbone that peeked from beneath her shirt when she reached for a bottle. The way she carried herself with a posture that spoke not of service work, but of combat discipline. He never confronted her, never exposed her secrets. Instead, he gave her the rarest things someone like her could ask for. Silence. Ravensbrook was filled with characters who made the Copper Still feel alive each night. Mayor Henry Gunderson, with his booming laugh and endless fishing stories, held court from his favorite table. To outsiders, he might seem like the town's anchor, but in truth, he was a man who loved his own voice more than politics. At the far end of the bar sat Martha Kane, 74 years old and sharp as the frost outside. To many, she was a relic, a widow who lived alone with her memories. But her eyes missed nothing. She sipped her gin and tonic once a week and cataloged every whispered rumor, every careless glance. Then there was Desmond Pike, Ravensbrook's self-appointed philosopher, usually found slumped over a whiskey glass, slurring half-formed theories about fate and destiny. Some laughed at him, others ignored him, but Elara always refilled his glass without judgment. Perhaps she saw something in his rambling, a man haunted, much like herself. These people had become her shield. Their chatter and laughter were the perfect camouflage, a curtain behind which Elara could hide her true self. But masks, no matter how carefully worn, eventually reveal their edges. When Elara wiped glasses at the bar, her movements were crisp, almost military in precision. A soldier's rhythm, not a bartender's. When tempers flared between loggers over a hockey game, she didn't flinch or raise her voice. She positioned herself so that one misstep would give her the advantage to break it up without injury. It wasn't force, it was strategy. Even her silence was deliberate. When locals teased her, 7 years and no one knows where you came from, Elara. Witness protection, maybe? She smiled politely and turned the question back on them. No one ever noticed how her eyes stayed cool, calculating, measuring every word. But Daniel Rourke noticed. Martha Kane noticed. And sometimes late at night, when the bar had emptied and only the echo of laughter lingered in the rafters, Elara herself wondered how much longer the disguise could last. For 7 years, Ravensbrook had been her sanctuary. The copper still gave her routine, anonymity, and something resembling peace. Yet even peace has weight, and Elara carried hers like a soldier, still gripping her rifle long after the battlefield had gone quiet. The scar beneath her collar was not her only mark. There were others, stories etched in skin, in memory, and reflexes she could never unlearn. Stories the people of Ravensbrook would never believe if they heard them. To them, she was only Elara Voss, the quiet bartender who poured their drinks and listened to their gossip. But Sheriff Rourke knew better, and in his silence there was both trust and warning. Because in places like Ravensbrook, secrets can survive for a while, but they never stay buried forever. The copper still was never silent on a Friday night. The clatter of pool balls, the laughter of loggers, and the hum of old country songs from the jukebox filled the rustic wooden bar like background music to 100 small dramas. But all of it changed with the sound of the door opening. A sharp gust of winter blew in, scattering snowflakes across the wooden floor. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, and for a heartbeat, Ravensbrook seemed to hold its breath. 4 men stepped inside. They weren't in uniform, but they didn't need to be. Their posture, their scanning eyes, the quiet coordination of their movements all screamed one thing to anyone who had ever served: military. Their jackets were heavy with snow, their boots tracked wet prints across the bar's floorboards, and their presence cut through the warmth like a blade. At the counter, Elara Voss froze. Only for a second, only long enough for Sheriff Daniel Rourke, perched in his corner stool, to notice the subtle tightening of her jaw. Then she moved again, smoothly wiping down the bar as though nothing had changed. But something had. The tallest of the 4 led the way, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, with a presence that carried both command and history. Commander Marcus Callan. His eyes, storm-gray and unflinching, swept the room until they landed on Elara. He stopped in his tracks. Behind him, the other 3, young, fit, alert, fanned out instinctively. One took up a position near the wall, another scanned the exits, and the third trailed slightly behind Callan, watching the room with the cautious sharpness of someone who'd learned not to underestimate even the most ordinary setting. The locals shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to outsiders like this. Hunters, truckers, tourists, they came and went. But these men, they weren't passing through. They carried themselves like they owned every square inch of the ground they stood on. Mayor Gunderson cleared his throat and raised his glass in an awkward attempt at hospitality. "Evening, boys. Rough weather out there." None of the SEALs answered. Their silence said enough. Callan's gaze didn't leave Elara. His expression, a flicker between disbelief and something harder, sharpened. Slowly he walked to the bar. The others followed at a respectful distance, but they watched her the way wolves watch fire. Elara set down the glass she was holding, her movements deliberate. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice steady, almost casual. Callan leaned closer, his voice low, just for her. "Operation Blackfin." The words hit like a gunshot, though no one else in the bar understood. The locals heard nothing more than 2 men exchanging a quiet sentence. But for Elara, the sound pulled her 7 years into the past, into salt spray, gunfire, and the smell of burning fuel under a blackened sky. Her hand tightened imperceptibly on the bar rag. She kept her face neutral, but her eyes, those betrayed her. A flicker, a shadow. The briefest break in the mask she had worn for so long. Callan saw it. He always had a talent for spotting weakness or truth, depending on the day. "You're supposed to be dead," he murmured. Elara gave a small, humorless smile. "So are a lot of people." She slid a whiskey across the bar toward him. "On the house." Around them, the townsfolk tried to pretend nothing unusual was happening. Martha Kane narrowed her eyes from her usual corner, watching the exchange with the sharpness of someone who missed nothing. Desmond Pike, already half drunk, leaned forward on his stool and muttered, "Knew it. Always said she wasn't just a bartender." Mayor Gunderson laughed too loudly, trying to drown the tension. "Well, look at that. Elara's finally got visitors from out of town. But the laughter didn't reach anyone's eyes. Sheriff Rourke shifted in his seat, his hand brushing the edge of his jacket where his sidearm rested. He didn't draw, yet, but the weight of the moment pressed against him like the storm outside pressing against the windows. Elara straightened, her eyes meeting Callan's directly now. The years fell away in that look. Years when she had been Commander Celeste Ward, not Elara Voss. He had been under her command once, back when the world was made of missions and codes instead of small-town gossip. She had trained him, trusted him, led him into fire, and he had believed she was gone, buried with the others who hadn't walked out of Operation Blackfin alive. "Why now?" she asked quietly, her words for him alone. Callan's jaw tightened. "Because Blackfin isn't over." Her pulse quickened, though her face remained composed. She slid another glass down the bar, a distraction for anyone watching too closely. "You should leave, Marcus," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "This isn't your ground." But Callan shook his head. "Neither is it yours. Not anymore. And if you're still breathing, then the people who killed our unit, they'll come for you." The younger SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't expected this, hadn't expected their commander to find a ghost alive and working as a bartender in a nowhere town. The weight of history pressed against the walls of the copper still, thick enough to smother the air. Elara wiped down the bar, her movements a shade too precise, her silence louder than words. Every scar on her body seemed to itch under Callan's gaze. She had built a life of shadows here, a quiet existence carved out of anonymity. And in a single whispered phrase, Operation Blackfin, he had torn it all open. The storm outside howled against the windows. Inside, the warmth of the bar felt fragile, as though one more word might shatter it. Sheriff Rourke's voice cut through at last, steady and low. "Elara, you know these men?" The bartender's rag stilled in her hand. Slowly, she raised her eyes to meet his. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, she answered, "Not anymore." The storm outside had been building for hours, but it wasn't the wind that pressed against the copper still's walls now. It was headlights, white, unyielding, slicing through the snow. Engines rumbled low, predatory. One by one, the townsfolk noticed the glow seeping through the frosted windows. The laughter that had struggled to restart after the SEALs arrived finally died altogether. Sheriff Daniel Rourke stood slowly, his stool scraping the wooden floor. His eyes darted to Elara, and the look she returned confirmed his worst suspicion. The past she'd buried was clawing its way back into Ravensbrook. Then the first SUV door opened. Boots crunched on snow. Dark silhouettes fanned out, surrounding the bar. Through the glass, more figures emerged. Disciplined, armed, purposeful. This wasn't a social call. It was a siege. The copper still, Ravensbrook's warmest refuge, had become a trap. The door opened again, not with the chaotic slam of a drunk logger, but with the measured confidence of someone who expected the world to step aside. Snow blew in, coating the floor, and with it came a man in his late 50s. His silver hair was perfectly combed despite the storm, his black tactical coat blending into the shadows of the room. Director Adrian Vance. He didn't need introduction. His presence carried authority, the kind that made soldiers stand straighter and civilians instinctively hold their breath. His pale eyes scanned the room, calculating, before settling on Elara behind the bar. "Well," Vance said with a thin smile, "if it isn't Ravensbrook's favorite bartender, or should I say, Commander Celeste Ward." A ripple of unease spread among the locals. Names carried weight, and that one, Celeste Ward, hung in the air like a blade. Elara's hand rested lightly on the counter. Her face was calm, but her eyes were locked on Vance's with quiet defiance. "You've been busy," Vance continued, stepping forward, his polished shoes clicking against the old floorboards. 7 years in hiding, pouring whiskey, pretending to be invisible. Did you really think you could run forever from the Acheron Protocol?" The word dropped like stone into water. Even Marcus Callan stiffened, recognizing it. The Acheron Protocol, the darkest of black projects, whispered about in briefings but never confirmed. It was said to involve bioweapons research, a weaponization of plague, A program so dangerous that even within military intelligence, its existence was taboo. Elara's voice was low but steady. I didn't run. I made sure the world would know. For the first time, Vance's smile faltered. I knew you'd come eventually, Elara continued, her tone sharp as broken glass. That's why I created a failsafe. 7 years ago, when you tried to erase me in Caracas, I had 7 days to prepare. 7 days to scatter encrypted files across the globe. Media outlets, private servers, dead drops. A simple timer keeps them locked. But if I don't reset it every week, she leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. The truth burns its way into daylight. The room was silent, save for the storm clawing at the windows. Locals stared wide-eyed, their bartender suddenly a stranger. The SEALs exchanged tense glances, but Marcus Callan's lips pressed into something between admiration and grim resolve. You're bluffing, Vance said finally, though his voice lacked the certainty he carried in. Try me, Elara replied. Vance gestured sharply, and half a dozen men in tactical gear raised their weapons. Sheriff Rourke's hand went to his revolver, but before he could act, Marcus Callan stepped forward, his SEALs moving with him in perfect synchronicity. They didn't raise their weapons at Elara. They raised them at Vance's men. In the tension-soaked air, Marcus spoke, his voice carrying the authority of a soldier addressing not just his men, but history itself. You can deny her name. You can call her a ghost, but we know who she is. She led us through Damascus. She carried us out of Tehran. Her record may be buried under layers of classified ink, but every man in the teams knows what she did. And then, one by one, the SEALs lifted their hands in salute. To the townsfolk, it was just a gesture. To those who understood, it was an oath. Commander Celeste Ward had returned. The gesture rattled Vance more than the threat of any gun. He had built his empire on secrecy, on loyalty twisted into silence. But loyalty was standing with her now, in the form of 4 SEALs defying orders by saluting a ghost. Fools, Vance hissed. You think you're standing with justice? She's a traitor who stole from her own government. No, Elara cut in, her voice sharper than his. I stole from you, from your private accounts, from the black budgets that funded weapons meant to kill civilians. Don't twist this into patriotism, Adrian. You profit from suffering and dare to wear the flag as cover. The words hung heavy, each syllable peeling away the mask of authority Vance had worn for decades. Weapons trembled in hands, some pointed at Elara, others at Vance's men. The copper still, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become the fulcrum on which secrets of nations balanced. Sheriff Rourke finally spoke, his voice steady as the steel in his holster. Director Vance, you'll show credentials or you'll leave. Those are the rules here. Vance turned his cold eyes on him, unamused. Sheriff, you have no idea what you're standing in the middle of. Don't need to, Rourke said. I know enough. His hand hovered near his gun. The standoff stretched, the storm outside roaring in sympathy. And in that moment, Elara, Celeste Ward, felt the weight of 7 years pressing down on her. The life she had built in Ravensbrook was ashes now. But the truth still lived, and it was stronger than ever. Adrian, she said, her voice calm, final. You came here to erase me, but I made sure the world would hear. And if I don't walk out of this bar alive, the Acheron Protocol walks out instead. The SEALs held their salute. The locals held their breath. And for the first time, Director Adrian Vance's eyes betrayed something more dangerous than anger. Fear. The room was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. The chamber wasn't the kind of courtroom found in television dramas. This was a bunker, deep underground, designed not for spectacle, but for secrecy. Thick steel doors sealed the space, and armed guards lined the walls. The insignia of the United States Navy hung behind the elevated bench where 2 senior officers presided. Admiral Jonathan Langston, his face chiseled from decades of command, sat stern and unyielding at the center. Beside him, Admiral Sophia Winters, younger but equally formidable, kept her sharp eyes fixed on the accused. Together, they represented the highest authority the Navy could summon without stepping into the public eye. At the defense table sat Director Adrian Vance, his suit impeccable, his silver hair carefully in place despite the tension. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had weathered storms of politics and espionage. Yet even he couldn't hide the faint twitch of his jaw. And across the room, seated with a calmness that belied the storm around her, was Celeste Ward, formerly known to Ravensbrook as Elara Voss. "Commander Ward," Admiral Langston began, his voice resonant in the chamber, "for the record, you were presumed dead 7 years ago during Operation Blackfin. Can you explain why you concealed your survival from your government?" Celeste met his eyes steadily. "Because, sir, any attempt to report what I discovered would have been intercepted. My survival was the only way to protect the evidence." Murmurs rippled faintly among the few officers and intelligence officials seated in the gallery. Winters leaned forward, her pen poised above her notepad. "And what evidence," she asked, her voice cool, "do you claim to have preserved?" Celeste tapped the tablet before her. A secure connection flickered to life, projecting images onto the large screen behind the bench. The first slide displayed financial transactions, millions funneled through shell corporations into accounts connected to Adrian Vance. Dates and numbers scrolled in precise order, each more damning than the last. Next came scientific reports, blueprints for pathogens modified beyond natural evolution, annotated with chilling efficiency. Side notes referenced deployment viability and extraction protocols. The third set of documents showed photographs, grainy but clear enough. Vance, seated in clandestine meetings with foreign agents, handshakes exchanged over files and briefcases. The chamber was deathly silent as each piece appeared. No one could deny the weight of what they saw. Celeste's voice carried evenly through the stillness. The project was called the Acheron Protocol. It wasn't national defense. It was profit. Bioweapons sold to the highest bidder under the guise of research. And when my team stumbled upon it, Director Vance authorized an ambush to erase us. Most of them didn't survive. I was meant to join them. Her words cut through the room like a scalpel. Vance leaned forward, his voice smooth, though thinner than before. "Speculation. Half-truths twisted from classified operations. You expect us to believe a ghost who reappears after 7 years with conveniently prepared files?" Admiral Langston's eyes narrowed. "Director, these accounts trace directly to entities under your personal authority." Vance's composure cracked for a fraction of a second. "National security requires flexibility. You can't wage war without dirty hands." Celeste's reply was sharp. "There's a difference between dirty hands and selling your own country's soul." Whispers broke out among the gallery, stifled quickly by a sharp bang of Langston's gavel. Admiral Winters spoke now, her tone laced with something beyond professionalism. Disgust. "Director Vance, do you deny receiving profits from these transfers?" Vance opened his mouth, but Celeste interrupted, her voice steady. "He can't, because I didn't just save files. I saved redundancies, multiple copies, sent to secure locations. If this tribunal ignores it, the world won't." Her words echoed with quiet finality. It wasn't a threat. It was truth. Langston leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Commander Ward, do you swear, under oath, that this evidence is accurate and unaltered?" "I do," she said without hesitation. Winters nodded to the guards posted at the door. "Director Adrian Vance," Admiral Langston declared, his voice booming, "you are hereby relieved of your position and placed under arrest for high treason, conspiracy, and crimes against humanity." For the first time, Vance's mask shattered. "You fools don't understand what you're tampering with. The Acheron Protocol is bigger than me. It's embedded at levels you can't touch." But his words dissolved into chaos as guards seized him, twisting his arms behind his back. The silver-haired official, who once commanded fear, now struggled like any other criminal dragged to justice. The gallery remained frozen in stunned silence until Winters' voice cut through. "Let the record show that Director Adrian Vance has been taken into custody pending full investigation. This tribunal stands adjourned." As the chamber emptied, Langston and Winters approached Celeste. Langston's voice carried a rare weight of respect. "Commander Ward," he said, "your actions may have been unorthodox, but they preserved national security and exposed corruption at the highest level. This country owes you a debt it can never repay." Celeste gave a small nod. Her eyes weren't on them but on the steel doors where Vance had been dragged out. The battle wasn't over. Not if his words about deeper roots in the protocol were true. Sheriff Rourke, seated quietly in the back, caught her gaze and gave a small, affirming nod. Marcus Callan, standing near the gallery, straightened as if awaiting orders not yet given. For Celeste Ward, survival had never been enough. Justice was only beginning, and as the heavy doors clanged shut, sealing away the echoes of Vance's fury, one truth lingered in the silence. The world had nearly been burned by secrets too dark to remain hidden, and it was Celeste who had lit the first match of revelation. The tribunal was over, but the weight of it lingered like smoke after a fire. Celeste Ward, once a ghost, once presumed dead, walked out of the underground chamber into the pale light of morning. Reporters crowded the steps, their voices rising in a cacophony of questions, but security kept them back. Cameras flashed, trying to capture the face of a woman who had just torn open the fabric of a conspiracy. Celeste didn't speak to them. She didn't need to. The truth was already spreading, carried not by her words but by the evidence she had protected for 7 long years. Later that evening, in the quiet corner of a safe house outside Washington, Marcus Callan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Sheriff Daniel Rourke sat across from Celeste at a small table, his weathered face lit by the glow of a single lamp. "So what now?" Rourke asked, his tone gentle but heavy. Celeste didn't answer immediately. She stared at the cup of coffee in her hands, steam curling upward like fleeting ghosts. She had spent years imagining this moment, the moment when the truth came out, when Vance's empire collapsed. She had expected relief, vindication, perhaps even peace. But peace was complicated. The Navy had already offered her reinstatement, full honors, even a promotion. Admiral Winters had said it outright. "We need you back. The fight isn't finished." And Marcus had stood silently behind her, waiting for her decision, his loyalty unspoken but unwavering. Yet when Celeste closed her eyes, she didn't see strategy rooms or war zones. She saw Ravensbrook. She saw the copper still bathed in lantern light. Mayor Gunderson laughing too loudly, Martha Kane sipping her gin with hawk-like eyes, Desmond Pike muttering philosophies no one asked for. She saw herself, Elara Voss, wiping down the bar, pouring whiskey, invisible but content. 2 lives, 2 names, and both were hers. Rourke broke the silence. "You know, folks back in town, they'll find out eventually. Might take them a while to believe it, but they will. You're not just Elara anymore." She looked up at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I was never just Elara, but I'm not only Celeste either." His eyes narrowed, thoughtful. "So which one do you want to be?" Her answer came slowly, with the weight of truth. "Both." Marcus finally spoke from the shadows. "That's not how this world works, Commander. You can't live in 2 identities." Celeste shook her head. "Maybe not perfectly, but I don't need perfect. I need balance." 2 weeks later, the copper still reopened its doors. Word had spread, twisted by headlines and rumors. The bartender who was a commander. Some locals came out of curiosity, others in quiet solidarity. The bar looked the same, but every eye turned when Celeste, now openly herself, stepped behind the counter again. Mayor Gunderson broke the tension first, raising his glass. "Well, I'll be damned. All those fishin' stories I told, and you never once mentioned you were saving the world." Laughter rippled, awkward but genuine. Martha Kane lifted her gin with a knowing smirk, as if to say she'd always suspected. Even Desmond Pike managed a slurred, "Told you she was more than a bartender." Celeste smiled, not the practiced smile of Elara Voss hiding her scars, but a real one. For the first time in years, she felt whole. Later that night, when the last patrons had drifted home, only Rourke remained, sitting in his usual corner. He watched her clean the bar with the same quiet precision, though something in her movements had changed. "Why here?" he asked at last. His voice was soft, but the question cut to the bone. Why hide in Ravensbrook of all places? Celeste paused, her hand resting on a glass. She looked around the bar, the worn oak, the lanterns, the echoes of laughter that had carried her through 7 winters. "I didn't just hide here," she said, meeting his eyes. "I found home." Days turned into weeks. Officially, Celeste Ward accepted a new role, special advisor to naval intelligence. Not a frontline operative, but a quiet force, offering counsel on missions where her experience mattered. It allowed her to serve without surrendering the life she had built. Unofficially, she remained Elara Voss, bartender of Ravensbrook, pouring drinks, listening to gossip, living in plain sight. Two names, two lives. And for the first time, she no longer had to choose between them. Ravensbrook was never a place that chased headlines. It was a quiet Montana town where winters were long, stories were shared over whiskey, and everyone thought they knew their neighbors. That's why, when the world discovered that their bartender was really Commander Celeste Ward, the shock rippled far beyond the snowy streets. At first, strangers came to see her. Journalists snapped photos of the copper still, treating it like a monument. But while the world gossiped about the ghost commander, Ravensbrook made a quieter decision. They chose to keep seeing her as they always had, as Elara Voss, the woman who poured their drinks, remembered their stories, and listened when no one else would. Yes, she had been a soldier. Yes, she had carried secrets strong enough to topple empires. But to them, she was still theirs. Sheriff Daniel Rourke put it best one night at his usual stool. She may be a hero to the country, but here, she's family. Laughter followed, and with it, the last of the unease slipped away. Celeste Ward belonged to history. Elara Voss belonged to Ravensbrook, and together she was whole. But her story was never just about her. It was about the people we overlook, the quiet ones who carry unseen scars, who endure without applause, who hold back truths too heavy for others to bear. The nurse who saves lives without recognition, the veteran who walks among us silently, the neighbor who carries burdens we'll never know. Elara's silence had been her shield, her way of surviving. And yet, in that silence, she carried a voice powerful enough to expose corruption at the highest levels. Her life became proof of something timeless. The world is full of invisible heroes. Sometimes the quietest person carries the loudest story. Now it's your turn, watching from wherever you are. If this story moved you, if you believe that hidden heroes walk among us, people whose strength and sacrifice go unnoticed, let your voice be heard. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience, courage, and the quiet power of ordinary lives. Because legends don't always wear uniforms, and heroes don't always stand in the spotlight.